Hello and welcome to another special edition of the Orlando Soccer Show. This time, talking some World Cup, that little tournament coming right down the road here in a couple of weeks. I am your host for this, Kyle Foley, joined as always by the esteemed, legendary Bowling Green State University goalkeeper hanging in the rafters, Brent Peckus. Brent, how's it going?
It's doing great.
We are also joined, thankfully, by Jeff Rueter from The Guardian, here to talk some U.S. men's national team as we preview what the World Cup's going to look like for them. Jeff, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Now, obviously, you guys were kind of the first ones to break the roster. You guys have known it's been public for a couple of days. We're recording this just for reference, only a couple hours after the official reveal, but everyone's known for a couple of days what the roster is. So I guess I just want to start with from either one of you guys. Brent, we'll start with you real quick, and then we'll go to Jeff. Like, thoughts on the roster? What was your first reaction when you saw that?
First reaction is there's no midfield. They're clearly going in playing three in the back. They're going to play three center backs, which that was the main takeaway of, like, they are not trying to hide that. I feel like that's just the go in of, like, you're going to know if like U.S. soccer tends to do that where they prepare for the first three matches, a group, and then after that they don't worry about it. But they kind of have a cloak and dagger of how they're going to get through that season. No one really knows how to get. They're going to get through the group. It's pretty clear what this formation is going to be and how they're going to set up. So that was a little bit of a shock for me, just the breakdown of how they broke it down for defenders, midfielders, and forwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's big. There doesn't feel to be a lot of balance in the construction of this squad, and I think the basic definition would just be you hope that you have two good options at every single role on the field and then a third goalkeeper because the laws make you, right? Like when the old 23 player squads for men's World Cups, and then the ones that, by the way, are still being used for women's World Cups, it's still 23, not 26. Hopefully they change that for next summer. But the calculus looks so clear, and in theory, when you have three more, you should be able to just fortify where you have your biggest zones of insecurity about your team. Well, it's very clear at this point that Mauricio Pochettino and his backroom staff is incredibly anxious about the state of the defensive core for the U.S. men's national team. I don't think that there's any other reason you can cite to justify bringing in five center backs, five fullbacks, and a winger who you most recently played as kind of a wingback, or did in March. So, there's just so much defensive cover on here that I worry about the ability for this team to evolve itself as the tournament goes, and especially in midfield, which Brent talked about. But like, I think that it's worth driving home that throughout his tenure, Mauricio Pochettino has not been consistent about how he utilizes his midfield. He doesn't have the same personnel week to week, and part of that is off of selection availability, right? Tyler Adams is only going to be in 60-70% of camps these days, just given how his body has tended to handle the modern game's workload. You've got Johnny Cardoso, who's missed time with injuries. Terrence Tessman, Morris got selection into a lot of recent windows, but excuse me, not this World Cup squad. So therefore, those are minutes that then weren't given out to players who could have been, like, for example, in his press conference, Pochettino talked about how there were other players who could maybe factor into central midfield. And he was saying Anthony Robinson did a little bit of that work ad hoc against Jamaica in the Nations League, and Malik Tillman and Gio Reyna could maybe drop deeper. Well, it's like, great. Well, then you should have given those reps ahead of time when the games didn't matter, because now you're going to be doing it against Senegal and Germany. And frankly, those are the two games that all of your opponents, Paraguay, Australia, and Turkey, are going to be watching closest, because that is the actual squad that you have brought. And so at this point, it just feels like a lot of that was kind of wasted time. We knew the strikers. We knew the two of the three goalkeepers. It was always going to be a Chris Brady versus Patrick Schulte versus, wild card option C for third goalkeeper. But by and large, the balance of this squad is what surprises me the most, or inherent lack thereof.
Yeah, it's just such a weird decision. Everyone's been talking about it's Aiden Morris and Tanner Tespin are the two surprising ones. I think most people agree Tanner Tespin more surprising missing out on this. I feel like this squad absolutely could have used a player like that over, maybe one of these center backs that's there, because it's so much of the World Cup too is how long can you stay healthy? How
Yeah.
long can you get these guys to play consistently? And so you are one Tyler Adams injury away from not really having any good holding midfielders in that role. There's not really a like for like replacement. Now, there's also not, like, in the pool anybody that can really replace him. I get that. I don't want to take away from how important he is, but it is weird that you don't, especially because of how much he's specifically mentioned Tanner Tessman lately. It's not even like this is just a player that we're just pulling out and going, ah, he's been really good, but maybe he doesn't know about him. It's like, no, he just recently spoke about him. So this is such a surprising, such a weird. I know a lot's been made of Diego Luna and some of the other
Mm,
MLS guys not getting a call up, but the real surprising one is when you're only going with four central midfielders and you don't even bring in one of the guys that you talked about consistently. I don't understand, and I don't think anybody really understands right now what this U.S. men's national team, what its identity is, and it's something we talked about a little bit beforehand. So much of Pochettino's career has been made off of his teams having a clear identity. There's a culture, there's a buy. You know what you're getting when he was with Tottenham. You knew what you were going to get. Even when he was at PSG, to some extent, you knew what you were
mhm,
going to get. Now it's such a bizarre everything's and listen, he's still arguably one of the top 5 best coaches in the world right now. I think any club outside of only a handful would kill to have him right now. So it's not like he's lost it and he's no longer able to do it anymore, but it's so confusing as to what the approach is, but, like you said, the Senegal and Germany games, I mean, those are everybody's gonna be watching what you do, and my thing is, as I sit here and listen to you say that, I'm like, I don't even know if he's gonna show his cards there. I don't even know if,
You
we're gonna get
shouldn't.
something right,
yeah,
like, at that point, just go bizarre, play things that people aren't gonna expect, don't even play Tyler Addo, like, keep some of those guys, Chris
mhm.
Richards, obviously, with the Conference League final, like, keep him healthy, like, keep these guys off and do what you can, but it's such a weird lineup. We'll go kinda just position group by position group, though, to talk about who is there. Brent, obviously, the goalkeepers, you've got a lot of thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know who he's gonna start. Turner's had such a great season in Major League Soccer, and, Freeze kinda had that strong come up. It I if I had to guess, I'd go with the experience in Turner. I'm interested to see what you think, Jeff, because I just think that in the World Cup, you need someone who has the experience, to get you through, and it I just don't think that the other there Freeze is the option at this point.
There's it's really funny because, throughout the like, in March, I was down in Atlanta covering those 2 friendlies, with Pablo and with Alex Abnos, our editor at The Guardian, and Pochettino was talking a lot about how the Gold Cup gave the requisite experience, and he said this during the Gold Cup, for Matt Freese to be able to be a tournament goalkeeper. Well, with all respect to the Gold Cup, it is such a different beast when you get to a World Cup. And I think that there is that inherent pressure of being the host nation. And I think that it's something that we maybe don't appreciate just how successfully Tony Meola has navigated the last like 32 years, being one of the absolute faces of the team with his ponytail as well, being a really good goalkeeper, and then continuing to be such a gracious sort of steward of the game, whether it's in media or other speaking availabilities he does. But there is so much visibility on that role that you kind of wonder if that's impacting Matt Freeze's approach with New York City. Now, bear in mind they've also had some major injury issues at New York City FC. They've fallen off a lot since last year's team that made it to the conference final. In Pascal Jansen's second year, opponents are kind of understanding how to game plan for them better. So some of this is also just a matter of like the entire team kind of getting found out in tandem. But it was something that kind of struck me as a little bit curious about Matt Turner keeping the one shirt for this tournament, because that was maybe the biggest news I learned from this entire event was what squad number each of these guys had, because again, we
Mm.
reported all 26 of them at the Guardian. But I, when you hand Turner one, when you see that he's in this form, when you see how gracious he was to be able to lead the team out onto this weird choreographed stage televised event, like, that isn't why he's your starting goalkeeper, but a starting goalkeeper is an obvious player to have kick off that procession. And so I am very curious, given all of these sorts of recent findings with this squad, with how the squad was told who was the squad and not told. It seems like Pochettino isn't really looking for continuity as much as maybe he had claimed here. And so I do actually I completely understand it being treated as a wide open question at this point, which Matt will start in goal, because I don't think we're really saying Chris Brady is going to be the starter at this World Cup with 0 caps to his name, right? We are asking about which Matt it will be. And I think that it is as viable of a coin flip here in battle as it has been at any point of Pochettino's tenure, frankly, because it was really clear after the Gold Cup he was just trying to kind of continue to build continuity with the defense and then seemingly lost that appetite in March. Each of them starting a defeat against a European country. Yes, Turner gives up 5 goals, but I think if you watch them, none of them were really like, oh, that's the goalkeepers to stop. Maybe one where he was screened, I think, by Tim Ream within 5 yards. And so that's a reflex thing, but like within 5 yards. You're only
Yeah.
talking about a handful of goalkeepers in the world who are going to be able to drop down on a dime like that and still parry the ball away from the frame of goal. So um, I think at this point I would actually have more confidence in Matt Turner just from my position, given some of that experience in Qatar and certainly his current form with the Revs. But I won't be surprised if it's still Matt Freeze because there's got to be something we can glean from the last 18, 20 months of Pochettino as like, oh, that was with an eye on the World Cup. Because if that doesn't, then there's just very little of this that makes sense in terms of continuity.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, the Turner that played against the European team is a completely different Matt Turner who came to Major League Soccer, started for New England Revolution, and started to get more reps. This is a different, Matt Turner. I think when you talk about Tony Meola, I think you go back in history, right? The last time the U.S. hosted, Tony Meola was the goalkeeper. In 1990, he was not the goalkeeper going into that tournament. It was Dave Ranoli, who made some amazing saves in qualifying, but that at that time they gave it to the young Miola because it knew in 4 years' time they're going to need experience in that goalkeeper position. So if we look at history, I think I agree with you, Jeff. I think it's going to be Matt Turner who's going to be the goalkeeper, um, and I think that you have to go with the experience. And I think the visual of him today leading them out onto the field and getting the number one shirt, all for me points to that direction. But again, to your point, not wouldn't be shocked if Reese got the call at some point.
With the third keeper, obviously Chris Brady, you kind of mentioned like we don't really expect him to play. I'm just curious, kind of what your thoughts are on that third goalkeeper position. We had talked previously about maybe a guy like Zach Steffen, someone with a little more experience. There's two ways you can go with that, right? You can get a guy who's young. So for Chris Brady, it's getting to be a part of the World Cup, getting to be there and go through it all. And as someone who could potentially take over that role in the future, but also there's the flip side of you want someone maybe with more experience who's maybe been in these kind of situations. I mean, not quite the same, but has that more experience. Like it's either way you go, there's pluses and minuses. So what's the benefit of choosing someone like Chris Brady for this tournament?
I think the benefit is that theoretically the only true like experience has seen every stage before that you have is one of your two viable starters, right? And so I think that when you're in a situation where you have two goalkeepers in their relative prime years, I know Freeze is, probably a cycle younger at this point than Turner if you're looking at most goalkeepers' career, but generally are both in their in the years you would expect a goalkeeper to start. Well, you don't really need to get like it was Sean Johnson in 2022, it was Nick Raimondo in 2014, Marcus Hahnemann, in 2006 or 2010. But like you don't really need to get that guy who's necessarily just going to be the like veteran who has at least been in Gold Cups and Nations Leagues and friendlies with a lot of these teammates to kind of help keep morale. So maybe it does make sense in this point if you're trying to keep it from being like a competition against all three just to have it be another young option. And at this point, I think it signals that Chris Brady is viewed within the program, if not by Pochettino, then by Jack Robinson, the head of goalkeeping or the goalkeeper coaches on staff, as the goalkeeper of the future for the U.S. men's national team to an extent that is as great, if not greater than Diego Cochen, who would be, the other one I would have thought would have been just that wild card, uncapped, young goalkeeper of the future type of profile, just given how he has continued to refine his game with more starts with Barca B and start to make Hansi Flick's bench once in a while as Szczesny and Ter Stegen's status varied throughout the season. Um, I guess with Brady, I mean, the thing that's been really encouraging for me about him in MLS has been his development of recirculatory and possession and short distribution from the back. He's getting a little better at cross claiming too, but it's really that sort of stuff that's come along quite nicely since Greg Berhalter took over the Fire. Come when you compare it to his metrics in his first 2 years as a starter, where he was kind of just lumping it to Rosie if he couldn't get it upfield, which I think is also, by the way, just a really good thing to tell a young goalkeeper to get them out of trouble. So you've got that. I think that it's something that bodes really well for Brady. I won't be surprised if suddenly Brady gets a couple of extra calls just purely by being a part on this squad in terms of being able to move abroad. And I think at this point, frankly, whenever he feels ready to make that step. Let's see how he does. But yeah, I think that there is something really interesting. 4 years ago, we had Gaga Slonina move to Chelsea, and everyone kind of assumed this would be his spot, if not to be guy three, who is kind of learning the ropes ahead of 2030, but actually maybe be in contention. And instead, it's the academy product who took his place after he left Chicago, who ends up on the squad there.
It's gotta be a good thing. One of the things that's looking through this roster, there's a good handful of MLS players. Like, that is a good thing for the domestic league, while there's lots of questions over whether the league has kinda reached the promise that was expected going back to its founding. There's plenty of arguments both ways, but it is nice when you get guys like this who, yeah, like you said, there are players like Slonina who are going overseas, and the thought process initially is this is a guaranteed this is going to be the guy, or even like Koshin being over with Barcelona. It's like, oh, these guys are playing for these, or at least in the system of these elite historic clubs, and instead, oh, here we've got a guy from Chicago come up through the academy playing there. That's got to be such a good. We're seeing it with like Alex Freeman from Orlando has been really interesting to see his rise. Such a good thing for MLS teams and their academies as we continue to grow the sport to, hey, look, this is you don't always have to go overseas. Obviously, I think the expectation for a lot of these guys is they'll go play, but all three goalkeepers play in Major League Soccer, and all three goalkeepers have made their name there. The best moments of Matt Turner's career have been both in Major League Soccer and with the U.S. men's national team. They have certainly not been overseas, so it certainly says a lot for the league and its development of players.
And by the way, it also says a lot about what it can offer a player in their prime. I think that has been one of the stories for me of MLS this cycle, has been this sort of emergence of, yes, you've got your Ricky Pujas, your Hani Mukhtars, your Martin Ojedas, your players are going to be moving here at younger ages to make this one of the headline stops in their career rather than either a stepping stone or a once up, once back down again sort of scenario, right? Um, what you have though is a player pool that had a lot of young players move to as big a club as possible as soon as they could and start to learn the ropes of positional play within each of those schemes, right? You see the Red Bull DNA in Tyler Adams. And yes, I know that's a New York example, but it also is how he continued to develop at Leipzig before he went to Leeds, where a lot of that DNA was shared when Jesse Marsh was appointed, right? You also have like let's take Yunus Musa as a really good example of this. As a player who didn't come up through an MLS academy, but he decided to go from Valencia, where he was getting minutes and was gradually getting integrated into the midfield rather than playing as a wide midfielder or a right wing back as he was at first, and then went to AC Milan because it was like the biggest club that was going in for him, and theoretically he would have been able to hopefully work into their midfield in time. Well, what ended up happening is that his development kind of stalled out to such a point because they would change coaches and they didn't see him as an obvious fit to help change results, because a coach who takes over mid-season is trying to keep the job, and to keep the job is to do better than your predecessor, to do better than your predecessors win. I know you know all of this sort of stuff, but it's you can kind of appreciate it in the context when you hear it with these big clubs, because that isn't how Major League Soccer operates at present, and part of that is by design, right? But what you do have is a player like Sebastian Berhalter, who 4 years ago was told thanks but no thanks by Austin FC after a loan spell and said, we don't think you're good enough for Austin FC. Look how great Austin FC is going to be from 2022 until 2026. Trust me, bro. And you have him at a crossroads in his career, goes to Vancouver, gets a lot of attention because he is a cheap young alternative who is very hungry and very smart and works into being a player that someone like Mauricio Pochettino will prefer over Yunus Musa, despite his CV and his pedigree. Christian Roldan stays with the same club for 4 years, evolves his role to be from box to box, to say, hey, maybe it's actually better if I put some more steel in my game for my longevity as not just maybe a national team player, but just a starter in Major League Soccer. And now he is here as one of four rosters. And I think both of those players probably should be expected to play at least 100 minutes based on the construction of this squad at this tournament, as long as they advance to even the round of 32. So I think Major League Soccer now has also kind of proven itself as a place where certain players can get regular games in more marquee roles that will be harder to find in Europe. We haven't even said Gio Reyna, and that's obviously the textbook example, but I'm so sick of talking about it. Where it's just like, would he be at a better point in his career if he had played 2,000 minutes with New York City FC on a loan spell over the last 12 months? Guaranteed. No question about it whatsoever. But that is not being considered by a certain portion of these players. And in some of their cases, it's meaning more viable alternatives who are maybe being a little bit less. It's not even less ambitious. It's being more focused on what's going to be best for their career. A little less wary about like optics and more focused on how they're going to be in the best position for themselves to be in these spots. That is something Major League Soccer can provide. And that, by the way, is a status that you often associate with, let's say, like Denmark or Croatia or Poland, Austria, Belgium, maybe not quite Portugal and Holland, but like right there where you're looking at these leagues as like, hey, guys who are playing regularly and turning up at least deserve a look. And then if they can hang at that level, that's on them. And I think that we've seen more of that from Major League Soccer over the last 4 years within this player pool.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge for the league. Like, obviously, you get the marquee names, and you go back to the David Beckham years and all of that change that came with it. You obviously Lionel Messi now and Heung-min Son, Antoine Griezmann coming to Orlando, Thomas Muller in Vancouver. There's a bunch of these guys that are kind of past their prime, but still good. And it's easy to point at that and go, retirement league, blah blah blah. It's the same conversation people have been having for 2 decades now. But there's so many of these guys that are coming in, not even just for the U.S. but for other teams too, where they're in the prime of their game, and it is better to get more consistent playing time versus necessarily what club are you affiliated with. So it's been interesting to see as we go through the roster, seeing these different players that have either are applying their trade in MLS or at least got their start in MLS, and that's where they develop from. Moving on to the defense, we should go through and list off the names real quick for folks listening if
It's
you
like half
have
the
not had a
squad
chance.
buckle in print.
I'll be here for an hour. We got Max Arfson from Columbus, Serginho Dest from PSV, Alex Freeman from Villarreal, and Orlando City, Mark McKenzie from Toulouse, Tim Ream from Charlotte FC, Chris Richards, Crystal Palace, Anthony Robinson, Fulham, Miles Robinson, FC Cincinnati, Joe Scally, Borussia Mönchengladbach, and Austin Trusty for Celtic. There's a whole lot of defenders here. I guess this team's not going to concede at all.
Yeah, it's that easy. I think you've watched all of these defenders enough to be really confident that this is just Catenaccio round two again. No, I think that this is where you look and to bring back your earlier thoughts on Tanner Tessman. This is where I was like, okay, Tessman over one of Scally or Robinson probably assuages like 95% of concerns that a lot of people have with this roster. And I say that as someone who did think not just on how he had been utilized by Pochettino, but also on form that Diego Luna should have been on this squad, which I do. But I think that the biggest change that actually changes the fate for the US this summer is to replace one of those players who looks to be second or third choice in every single slot that they could potentially play in this tournament and replace with someone who could possibly start in the midfield, certainly would be the backup defensive mid, and has played at center back. So you don't really lose that wide center back potential. That is the reason that you would assume that Scally is here. And then Miles Robinson's probably being looked at as the more central option or like a tandem of back two, but you already have four other center backs who are doing that every single week. So like it just looks like redundancies at that point, and that's what I see with this defensive core. Is I see redundancies. I see a coach who worried that he didn't have either the right evidence, the right combinations, or whatever the case may be to make some hard decisions on Scally versus Dest versus Freeman, so didn't want to make a decision there, or five center backs didn't want to make a decision there, and knew he wanted two left backs despite having players who could maybe deputize there. And so just decided I'm going to make harder decisions in more talented areas of this player pool so that I have peace of mind that at least whatever the opponent's going to throw at me and whatever card accumulation. Maybe the other thing is this is going to be a defensive group that is expected to pick up a lot of cards. Maybe. I don't know. Like, I really don't know what else you would say to justify having 10 defenders on a tournament like this. But then again, Portugal is bringing four goalkeepers. So, like, teams can do whatever they want to do where they feel they have strengths and weaknesses. And that's kind of part of the fun of the 26 man, I suppose. But I just, it feels like there's just some redundancy here where there are some players I'm already looking at and saying, if he sees more than 10, 15 minutes at the end of a game, that's tough.
Yeah,
That's just like
Yeah.
not where this team would have expected to be.
It's always funny as like people who like pay attention to this sport, obviously for a living. This is like what we do. This is so much of our time is spent, and then we still sit here and go, man, I don't know. I don't know what's going. We've been running into this with Orlando City a lot this season. There's just been a lot of like, dude, I don't know. And there's like looking at this roster, the big name you mentioned, Joe Scally. That's the one that really stands out to me because this is someone who plays a very traditional left back position. He's not typically a wing back, so he's not really. It's not like any of these guys on the right who you have who are used to doing that. He's not someone I would slot in as a set. Like if he's playing as a wide center back, it's because you're in a bad situation and things aren't going well for you. I guess maybe some of it is there's the question mark around Chris Richards and how much he's going to be able to contribute and play. But it sounds like from what Crystal Palace have been saying, it's not a. I remember initially when the report came out, everybody was like, "Oh my God, he's out," and we're panicking. And then Leisner comes out and goes, "Ah," and he's just gonna miss the weekend game, and he'll probably be back for the Conference League final. We'll obviously see if he plays in that, but this is a team where you look at certain guys, you look at a guy like Chris Richards, or you look at Serginho Dest, or you look at even Tim Ream, which is crazy to think that as old and experienced as he is, that is still someone who will probably get pretty significant minutes. Like you look at these guys and you go, man, I know what role you play. I know where you're gonna go. I understand completely why you are on this roster. Then there's a Joe Scally, who great player, not to take away from what he's done in Germany. Austin Trusty is another one for me with Celtic. Again, like has had moments, has had sure, but do you need another player that does what he does? I don't know. So there are a lot of questions about this team defensively, or in terms of these selections defensively. There are a lot of good players here, though. There are a lot of good in the way that we saw them play with this three at the back under Pochettino. That is at least when the team started to look better. So I suppose there's some merit to this is the tactic that started to change the fortunes for this team. But I mean, I guess it helps that you're going up against some group stage opponents that aren't known for their high scoring. So you'll get some clean sheets. But it just is such a weird. It's hard to argue that anyone here on the merits doesn't deserve to be here, like that they're not good enough. But like we've all said, there's so many players in other positions that it makes so much more sense to have had these other things. Brent,
Yeah.
any other thoughts on the defense?
Yeah, my thing is the defense. I think you're right with Trusty and Scally. I just when this at some point in the World Cup, it becomes a gritty. It becomes very gritty, and so you need someone who's going to squeak it out and play for the badge. And you know, I saw all through the reports when Diego Luna wasn't on the team, it was about his fitness level. Diego Luna's not coming onto this team and playing 90 minutes in a World Cup match. He's playing 20, 30, and so like you could throw that fitness argument straight out the door. But I know that when you put him on the field, he's going to kick and scream for 30 minutes for that team. He's going to kick ankles. He's going to play for the badge. And I think a perfect microcosm of what U.S. soccer was in the early 94, 98, 2002 World Cups, where they didn't take crap from anybody and they weren't going to take crap from anyone. And, we've seen glimpses of that during Nations League against Mexico, right? But I still struggle with the Diego Luna admission, and I don't find fitness as the example or the reason why that he should be excluded. That's the only thing where I would switch Scally out with him and just give yourself some depth in the midfield. He can play in the midfield, he can play in the attacking midfield, he can play up top. Like he has some versatility. That's the part of the defense where I'm just like, I don't have someone who's going to kick and scream for the U.S. men's national team at that.
And I think the other reality to keep in mind, and you're alluding to this really well, Brent, is just like how many of those 20 to 30-minute shifts are you giving to defenders in any given game? And what does it say if you think it might be three or more? Right. Like, I think that generally when you look at substitution patterns for high level managers, it's probably be like what, two forwards, two midfielders, and the defender. And then, these will kind of fluctuate depending on the game and red cards and all these sorts of things. But by and large, I think that's a pretty normal expectation for teams, or one forward, depending how you categorize your wingers, three midfielders, and then one defender possibly. So I think it's so hard to envision a scenario where it'd be like, I'm really glad I brought that 10th defender rather than having another player who could play in an advanced role like Luna, or if you had decided McKennie is going to be dropping deep, then still having someone like Tessman or Aiden Morris in midfield then, who is able to come in and kind of mop up some of those hard minutes at the end if there's a situation where Roldan or Berhalter can't go. But right now at this point, you need all four of your midfielders, which I'm sure we're getting to right now, to be healthy and unimpeded by yellow card concerns and playing very well for every single minute they're on the field. And you just have like no leeway as it's constructed.
Well, the good thing is none of these four midfielders have ever at any point in their career made a rash challenge and gotten a card and been in any sort of trouble. So it's all good for the good old USA. Just really quickly going through the midfield, we obviously have Tyler Adams from Bournemouth, Sebastian Berhalter from the Vancouver Whitecaps, Weston McKennie from Juventus, even though they keep trying to get rid of him and he keeps coming back, and then Christian Roldan from the Seattle Sounders. We've obviously talked a lot about who is not there in the midfield. We're going to talk a little bit about who's here. The biggest name, Tyler Adams, who is, in my mind, the most important player for this U.S. men's national team. If you have Tyler Adams and he is playing at his best and he is healthy, this team, the ceiling for this team is significantly higher than if you don't. So the big thing is obviously we know how important he is, but who plays with him in that midfield that can complement him well, that can have a sustainable if the US wants to make a run. I know Pochettino's talked about a semifinal run, if we why not? So who of this group partners with him because there's not really a lot of options.
Yeah, I mean, I think nominally you would assume it's McKennie, but it's hard because McKennie was actually really enjoying finally getting to play closer to the final third by being that kind of auxiliary advanced midfielder alongside Malik Tillman during the first friendly against Belgium, and some of their best moments were generally finding him in the half space, and that's always been one of his like biggest skills, his abilities to find open space or to win the ball in areas when collecting the ball and advancing the ball upfield. He's a very good progressive receiver of passes, right? Better than progressive passer necessarily. Well, he's a better passer these days than he was 4 years ago. So, like, yeah, he is. He can fit. But I think that you're losing something by trying to keep Weston in central midfield or maybe in a truly like holding defensive midfield role. I just think that it's another one of those cases where you're asking one of your best players to be playing relatively out of position in terms of his best role at present, and maybe that's necessary to be able to fit Pulisic and Weah and probably Malik Tillman in the field at the same time, right? I think that was math was going to get really difficult unless McKennie was the one to drop deep. Otherwise, it's probably Tillman going to the bench if it's me. But I think as it's constructed, yeah, like McKennie maybe suddenly was having daydreams of being the guy who's, making the late run to the edge of the box and, tapping it in. And I think it's going to be an even later run if he's going to get there from defensive midfielder at this point. But he's probably your most likely to partner. And then I think Berhalter will be looked at as more of the 8, and Roldan will be looked at as more of the 6 in terms of the sort of backups in each role. What was really interesting too, by the way, in the press conference was Pochettino suddenly, when asked about the 4, was like, "Well, what are you talking about? We could play Malik Tillman back there. He's never really done that. We could play Gio Reyna there. He hasn't really done that since he was 19. We could do Serginho Dest and Alex Freeman. They have skill sets where they could play in central midfield. And it's just like, how much do you think we know about these players, and how much do you know about your players? If you're like thinking, okay, World Cup's coming up, and one of my concession plans is to maybe run a double pivot of Serginho Dest and Gio Reyna, like, good luck, Chief. I would love to be coming up against your team at that point, but it's such an obvious thin area for this team, and frankly, it's an area most teams just can't afford to be thin, and it was one of the biggest strengths under Berhalter was the MMA midfield, and even if you took Musa out and you brought in De La Torre or someone else, those roles were so coherent, and we're going into this World Cup with absolutely zero clarity about these roles in midfield, and that's concerning. That's one of the biggest concerns I think I have about this entire tournament at this point for the U.S., and given the depth of good options in midfield that this pool has, I never expected to be at that point 3 weeks out.
Yeah, that's the thing. You look at any of the like historically great teams, whether it's at the international level or the club level, it's always about the midfield. So the greatest players to ever do the game, to ever play the game, might not be lighting up the score sheet, but just incredible midfielders. Barcelona was led for so long by midfielders. You have some of the great Premier League teams, Manchester United and Chelsea and Liverpool, and some just iconic midfielders throughout these eras. And then you look at this team, and it is genuinely baffling to me to see midfielders parentheses 4 and look at that and go, man, this is with the deep pool of good midfielders that we have as a country to only bring these 4. And these 4 are all deserving of being here. These are
Yeah.
4 very good players, but in a tournament where you have to rely on being healthy and you have to rely on being available, to only bring in those 4 is just such a baffling thing to me. Obviously, we talked about someone like Testament or Aiden Morris. Like, there's so many other options we could go down the list of, "Oh, this player could have done it. This player could have done it." The other thing, though, that is it's kind of funny when you hear Pochettino talk about, the Serginho Dest and Alex Freeman or Gio Reyna and those things playing in that role. And it's for me, I sit there and I hear that and I go, "This is ridiculous. What are you talking about?" At the same time, this is a guy who clearly knows ball. It's not like he's, like, fresh off the street, Ted Lassoing it. It's gonna really frustrate me if we get to a point in this World Cup where you see one of those guys playing and holding midfield against, like, Turkey or in a knockout stage game, and they do really well, and then we all have to sit here and be like, "Man, I can't believe like, I don't get it. I don't understand." But,
Yeah.
there must be something that he's seeing that we're not, but, man, it's so bizarre. Universally, I think everybody's looking at this like, "What is going on here?" Those 4 are good players. there's nothing to knock him. Obviously, Tyler Adams super important. I agree with you on Weston McKennie. He's so much better when he's getting up top and he's getting more involved in the attacking third. And you've seen that with Juventus. That's the role that he's grown into. That's where he's been. So that's how he can go from every summer the manager saying, we're kind of done with him. And then midway through the year, he's scoring game winning goals in Champions League. Like it's nothing. Like he's such an important player in that role that it's such a weird thing to go with only these four. Brett, did you have any other thoughts on these midfielders?
No, and I could see a world where Tyler Adams is the only defensive mid and is trying to hold the whole space, and and that's a possibility. Tyler Adams has the ability to do that. I just think that you can't do that all tournament. He's
Yeah.
going to log 2 minutes, too much distance. It's just going to be an issue because if that's the case, your outside backs and whoever those will be will then kind of pinch in, and you can kind of get away with it for a little bit. But then you put McKinney up top and allow that to happen. But it it it, it the midfield that you have to have so many players, the distance you're going to cover in these games, and we're talking also no, it's the United States. It's going to be hot as heck.
Hmm.
Water breaks around. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be hot. West Coast games, like it, it's the thing that for me is the thing that scares me most about this team is the lack of depth there and the possibility of being exposed in the round of 32 or 16 when you need players with fresh minutes, with time, because you will get one or two people who will get injured or knocks or yellow cards. How are you
Mhm.
going to solve that if that happens in the midfield? And I don't know what they're going to have to ask a player to play a position they haven't played since they're 19, like the Gio Reyna, and have him play deeper in. And that's again playing someone like you said, Jeff, out of position who hasn't done it in a while, and that's not something you want when you're going for the most coveted trophy in all of soccer.
With an expanded roster.
Yes.
Again. Again.
It's not like there weren't choices here. It's not like he was hamstrung by only being able to bring 23. This is
Yeah.
obviously there's a clear. I don't know if it's a message being sent or it's just a clear thought process. Or I'd like to imagine somebody as successful as he's been throughout his career didn't just like come up with this roster on a whim. That there's some sort of thought process there that maybe he doesn't want to share or just hasn't quite shared yet. But it definitely does from the outside looking in. It feels like such a weird. I don't understand. None of us understand the 10 defenders and 4 midfielders, but I think all of us are kind of looking at this like, yeah, well, I hope it works out for you. We'll move in a little bit to the attack, talk about some of the attacking midfielders and wingers. This is another area where I think the U.S. is stacked, might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's some very good players here. We have Brendan Aronson from Leeds United, Christian Pulisic playing with AC Milan, Gio Reyna from Borussia Mönchengladbach. Obviously, people were kind of on the fence over whether he'd make it. He's one of your most creative players when he's healthy. Of course, he's going to be
Yeah.
there. Malik Tillman from Bayer Leverkusen, Tim Weah from Marseille, and Alejandro Zendejas from Club America down in Liga MX. What are our thoughts on this attacking midfielders slash wingers slash what formation is Pochettino going to run? It's a good group.
Yeah, there's talent there. I think a lot of this. First of all, the position group, you'll see the least discussion about most places, and I'm gonna go ahead and add to the pile here. Striker. It's just like this kind of picked itself by the end. Once Pat Ajimang suffered his injury, unfortunately for Derby County, like it made it very clear Haji Wright's gonna be looked at as a striker, and it's gonna be him and Pepe and Balogun, and in reverse order of depth chart most likely. But you can convince me Haji Wright's gonna come in more often than Pepe, just given utilization under Pochettino so far, which again means as much as Pochettino wants it to mean, and seemingly these days very little. So that's the striker depth chart. Flo Balogun is the best possible striker they could have brought to a World Cup since like peak Josie Altidore in 2014. And unfortunately, of course, his hamstring gave out within 20 minutes of that tournament. But it is a very viable pick to lead the line every single game and to score in 2 of 3 group stage games and then score in any knockout game where you give him good service. So that's great. Very confident in that one. That was a happy segment. But beneath them, it's just like, man, are you going to run attacking midfielders or are you going to run wingers? Because on the one hand, you could have like a Malik Tillman and again, it was McKennie in the last window, but maybe you're going Reyna. Maybe you're going to decide Reyna comes off the bench for 30 minutes in every game when opponents are more tired. So you have Brendan Aronson being kind of a wrecking ball for 60 minutes, and that could work at that point. Well, Christian Pulisic has been playing at the left wing for most of his national team career and been playing on right wing or right attacking midfield for Milan at his best. You've got Tim Weah has been playing as a right winger at his best for the U.S. men's national team. Yeah, you could play him at wingback, but he brought like 50 of those, so I don't really know why you're looking at him there. So are you gonna play him at striker like it's PSG in preseason friendlies 7 years ago? I doubt it. So I guess you have to play with him at right wing, which then says you need to have Pulisic at the left wing, and means that you are out of players if you're going to be playing with 5 defenders, and so you don't even really have a space for. And so then your changes of pace off the bench is like Zendejas, who can actually play in wide areas, or Tillman and Reyna and Aronson, who have each suffered diminishing returns the further from the center of the field you push them in your team's base formation. They do not thrive in that open space. They like to be in and around the defenders and near the box, and that's great. That's fine. You need players like that. They certainly missed it 4 years ago, having that sort of depth and quality there. But now there's just again so much there, and just a weird sort of calibration of balance where it's like you have players that fit one game model and players that fit others, and very few who look like they will fit both. You could probably argue that the best formation for this team is a 4-2-3-1, just in terms of like get your most talented 11 players out there, because people heard me. I'm sort of saying wingers or attacking midfielders and say like you can have both. And it's like, yes, you can, but not with 5 defenders. And that's where it comes into this tough spot where it's like maybe Brent's right. Maybe it is just going to be Tyler Adams rocking it solo in midfield, which then opens up McKennie to be a little bit more advanced and central. But it's just weird balance here. But real quick, like on Zendejas, because I know that that's kind of a surprise. Um, Maybe less so if you like actually like if you follow Club America or Liga MX at all, you're like, okay, he's been one of the best players in Mexico for 12 months, and certainly one of the best players in North America for 6. And so, in theory, if you're going to make the case that domestic form should get Diego Luna on the squad, your entire argument is kind of debased by have you watched Alex Zendejas lately? So like he has earned it. There's no part of like when I'm looking at who is the surprise here, like it's Aronson or Reyna, who I think is more likely the alternative to Luna there, just to kind of like focus that I've seen since we reported the squad a few days ago. Um, but yeah, just you've got options there. I don't think it's a bad cupboard of attacking midfielders and wingers. It's just like I don't know if Poch knows how he's gonna ideally set it up, and maybe he doesn't need to until day of. But it would sure make my job a lot easier if any of this hinted towards a coherent thing, or if he used the televised event and ensuing press conference to maybe explain some of the rationale for this. But frankly, we just got like zero of that today as well. So
Yeah. I think with the strikers, it's the first time I've seen that this team could beat you in versatile ways. I think we hadn't seen it since Josie Altidore, right? You have Balogun who can hold the ball up and allow the attacking midfielders to kind of play in with them. You have Haji Wright, Heppy, who can get behind, way I get behind you. This is the first time where I feel like if a team were to shut down crosses and services, we have a way to get through the center. We haven't had an attacking form like that in a long, long time. And I think the United States are at its best when we convert set pieces. We're known for it. And in many of the World Cups that we are successful, what is it, 94 and 2002, we found goals on set pieces or services. Um, and so I think that's the thing that stands out for me from the forward standpoint is that at any point we could beat a team either by combination play, direct, holding the ball up. There are different ways, and you have to do that in a World Cup where you're playing different types of style of soccer. You're going to play a Latin American team, right? A Copa, a CONMEBOL team who's going to be kicking and try to possess the ball, and eventually you're going to have to beat a European team. And you haven't found a United States team who has been the ability to beat all styles of soccer. And I think this is the best part of the World Cup. All the different styles of soccer come to play at a certain point. At a certain point, we've always struggled with one, whether it was from the African League of Ghana, who they would just run us to death, muscle us, and then we kind of figured that out. And then it was the European, the Dutch, right, in the last World Cup, where they kind of outclassed us for about 15, 20 minutes, and that was it.
Yeah.
So this is the first time where I've seen an attack where I feel confident that we can beat a team in different ways. And I haven't been able to say that since I think at least 2002 when they made that run in Korea.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is the most confident I think any of us have felt in the U.S. attack in a while. There's not really a question mark over who's going to be up there, who's going to do anything. There's a lot of solidity there. Really, the only question marks kind of come from the central midfield, and that's going to make or break your tournament. That's going to be the difference between a surprisingly deep run or maybe going out in the round of 32 or, God forbid, the group stage. Really quick, just kind of talking about the group. Obviously, the U.S. matched up with Paraguay, Australia, and Turkey. So what are now that we know the roster, we know the teams. What's the expectation now for this group? I mean, it's easy to say win the group. That's obvious. It's always the expectation. It's always the expectation when you're the host. But is that a realistic expectation? Is that what we see happening from this team?
I think it's the internal realistic expectation, and they've been talking like it for 8 years. So I don't want them to back off of that. To be fair, right? And I'm not saying that it's like they've deserved this status. They're the golden generation. Like this isn't any of that. But this is a generation of young players that did have an immense amount of talent. That did have high aspirations to make the world respect U.S. soccer in a way that they weren't used to. And so this is the moment to do it. And a lot of those players are arriving not in their best form, but certainly in full fitness. And that at a minimum is all you can really ask for. Like you are getting, you know, Pulisic and McKennie and Adams without like major, like last minute injury decisions, pending these last two friendlies, knock on wood, wherever you're listening. You've got, Balogun arriving in good goal scoring form. We've got Pepe in good goal scoring form, Haji Wright in good goal scoring form. So you have three strikers who are used to scoring goals at the club level. That's nuts. Like that just hasn't been the case for the US in history. So that's great. You've got defenders. You've got a defender who has won a FA Cup, who might have a conference league by the time he shows up to camp, right? So someone who's at least seen higher levels of Europe, that's a good start. We wish that there was a second defender next to him at center back that we were that confident in, but we'll take one. That's a good start. Midfield, Adams and McKennie both have done this at high levels. There is talent. And I think part of this is we are all really sick of talking about the talent and potential of this group without the accomplishments to make weight. And so, like, that's a really cool way to start that is by winning this group, is to say, like, hey, you know what? A lot of people were unhappy with us over the 4 year cycle. I get it. Did you see us at the Copa? We were never going to let that happen again. We weren't going to let Tim Weah get distracted by a shove in the back to then throw an elbow and get a red card to jeopardize a tournament. We learned from those mistakes. We weren't going to get overrun in midfield or get caught naive zonal marking a set piece or give too many dead balls directly to Christian Pulisic because he's wearing the 10, even if Berhalter is a better taker of those, or alternatives maybe will present themselves over time in the tournament, like Tillman and Reina and whatever. Maybe those are the lessons then that can look and say it was all worth it for something and it is growing to something. But at this point, these aren't prospects. Like the star players of this are not young prospects like they were in 2019 or even 2022, and they showed up as one of the two youngest teams in the tournament, if I remember right, on average age. Um, this is a team that should expect to be getting toward its peak form, if not right in the middle of it now. 2030 is a cycle that Sanjay Susan Thakumar has written a really good piece for The Guardian recently about how 2030 might actually be when this generation really peaks. And I tend to agree with him the more I think about it. But this is where it should at least start to show that this is a team that can win big games. And that means a group stage. And I think that the full focus has to be on getting 6 points from the first two, right? Like you can absolutely advance and win the group with 4 from your first two and getting a draw against one of Australia and Paraguay and beating the other one. You can do that. The math's just harder, and you still have to go to Turkey, who's going to be the other team that would walk into this group with aspirations of winning it being a realistic target. So you don't want to be in a position where you need to win that game. So you have to win the Paraguay game just so that you can keep good vibes around the team after the first game. Like that's more important when you host a World Cup than it is any other time. You don't want to be another one of the host countries that didn't win its opener, and so therefore everyone's like, okay, that was cute, and then you move on to the teams that you're going to follow in the tournament. They need to perform really well in that one. So like realistically, I think that this is a top 2 team in this group as long as they've got their heads on straight and as long as apparently Tyler Adams can go 200 plus minutes in these 3 games. That would be my realistic expectation though, would be top 2 in this group and not dealing with the calculus of the what is it, like 940 permutations of third place finishes that could lead to the knockout bracket. It's just ridiculous how this thing is set up, isn't it?
Yeah, the only
Yeah.
thing that should matter in that Turkey game is just figuring out who the next opponent is and not will there be a next opponent for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So I guess with that though, talking about like this team might not peak until the 2030 World Cup. I also tend to agree with that. But what is a successful World Cup for the U.S. men's national team here at home on home soil?
I think it is just play. I would like to see at least a couple of players look like they've put in kind of the highlights of their career. That's a really good start, right? Like I there's 3 guys on this squad who have scored in a World Cup. Weah's, I think, is a worthy, like, highlight reel kind of crescendo of the music cue that you put in the background, like, you're gonna want it to go around then. But, like, Pulisic, I think, will want a better goal than the one that he scored. Did it the hard way. Like, it's a really good sort of show the character of who he is on his day when he's representing the United States. But, like, I think that he'll also want one that's more like his opener in the Copa, which was a really well curled kind of short corner kick routine done well. So I'd like to see a couple things from that. I don't think that there's going to be nearly as much of a knock on effect for the domestic leagues here as possible, or as maybe has been projected by the investor class. I think that a lot of that has just been good sales pitching, I suppose. So I don't even really want to talk about like the knock on effects from there. But from this tournament, a successful tournament is at a minimum a competitive round of 16 again, which at least looks like you didn't lose ground over 4 years with a really difficult cycle with a coaching change in the middle of it and a tournament that went wrong to boot with the Copa, not the Gold Cup. I think that generally met expectations. And Yeah, if you can get to a quarterfinal, I think then you look and say that this group is a genuine dark horse threat if it builds correctly and finds the right coach to contend in 2030. And that would come sooner than I think a lot of us expected. And certainly once we saw how this group kind of handled 2024. So I'd take that.
Brent, your thoughts? What is success for the U.S. men's national team?
Talking first about the group stage, I think the group stage is I want them to advance out of the group. I think that's the minimum, but I want them to be, there's always a right before we get into the knockout phase of who are the hot teams going into the knockout phase. I want US to be part of that. For me, it's not about points. I want them to be in the knockout. I don't care if they're second, even if they get in third, but if they're the hot team, the team that's like no one wants to play, that's what I want to see. So it's more
Yeah.
about the play and the style that I see from them than the results. They have to get the results. 6 points, right? Sure. But I want them to be like, man, I want the front runners to be like, I don't want anywhere near this United States team at home in the round of 32, in the round of 16. I want that. And I think it's the building as we get into the knockout phase of, so we're in the knockout phase. Now, what are you going to do with it? What type of performances are you going to put out? And that's where I want to see those signature performances from some of these players that you kind of talk about, Jeff. And I think ultimately that is going to be success that when we close this tournament, whoever is the winner, and whoever United States is that I want them to be able to say that U.S. is one of the top 4 teams in this tournament, and not maybe it may not be based on knockout and where they phase out, but they put in the performance where, and in 2030, this is not a team. This is where you start to think about in 2030, can they be in pot A? Can they be in that first pot, in that ranked pot? And I think that starts with this tournament. And when you're the host, once you get to the quarterfinals, anything can happen. Where you're a handball away in 2002, right? Anything can happen the way if you're building that level and you're that dangerous team, and that's kind of what I want to see. My expectations, if I had to put around, it's Sweet 16 or bust. Like it's get to the round of 16, get there, and then go, and then after that, it's all house money.
Yeah, no, I
What do
agree.
you
And
think? Yeah.
yeah,
Where's
it,
where's your expectation?
it is so much of a like don't embarrass yourself kind of thing, but I feel like we have kind of moved past that. The thing that's hard is as someone that like I interact so often with people, especially in Orlando, who just don't they might watch Orlando City, but when it comes to caring about the U.S. men's national team, it's very much they're a joke. The women's team is great, men's team sucks, ha ha ha. So some of it is just put on a good show, and wherever that there's not like a set. You've got to make a quarterfinal, you got to make the semis or whatever. But there is definitely if you don't make it out of the group stage, I think that would be because something bizarre happened. But it is like Brent said, you want to be one of those hot teams. You want to be a team that when other people are about to play you, there's that feeling of oh crap, this is going to be tough. I we're gonna have to give everything, and whether you win or lose that game as the US, you at least wanna be in those positions. You wanna be in the game where everybody's watching and going, like, "There is a chance that they win this dark horse team," where, like Pochettino says, "Why not us? Why can't we win it all?" Well, we could talk about the reasons, we could talk about the roster and the history and all of that, but when it comes to playing in a tournament, the only thing that matters is those 90 minutes. And so I think success for this US men's national team is building on what you've done over the last couple decades of stuff as we've come up from the 90s all the way until now, and what's been building, and just put on a show and give people something to believe in and rally around. It does kind of lead into the last thing I want to talk about on this. I think we would be remiss to not talk about the state of everything here in the United
Mm,
States, which is obviously, to put it politely, a disaster everywhere. Jeff, you wrote
yeah.
an incredible piece in The Guardian a couple months ago after the Alex Preddy shooting about just this, like, the relationship between, I have this sport that I care deeply about, but I also have this community, whether it's a local community there in Minnesota or it's just the community throughout the United States, or even with, seeing reports that Iran is moving their base to Mexico, and we still don't know if they're going to be allowed to come into the United States to compete. There's so much around this World Cup that is, not that the World Cups in Qatar or Russia felt completely clean either, but this, just because it's so close to home, because these are our communities, these are our, when we talk about the US, I'm always very specific when I talk about Orlando City to not say we or our or whatever. Like, this is not me. I
Yeah.
am just covering this. With the United States, I mean, this is my country. I've been here for 30 years. I have a complicated relationship with it, sure, but these are our countrymen. These are the fans are our neighbors and our relatives and our friends, and they it's so difficult to be excited about this tournament when you see this. And I think we're starting to see the ramifications of that, whether it's the insanity around the ticket prices, or even watching the roster reveal on TV today with an abysmal crowd. I think any sort of event like that in New York City any other year is getting a sellout crowd. Everybody's shoulder to shoulder, and push. So I guess I don't really have like a specific question on this because this is such a hard
No,
thing to
that's
narrow
fair.
down.
How do you even
Wh-
begin to grapple with the state of America in 26? I get it. I totally get it. But like I think that when you look at this tournament, like I think you're starting to see it used as a launch pad to kind of push back against the going rate of things over the last decade, let's say. Um since the start of administration 45, I'd say. Because I think that you look at so a week after I wrote that piece you're referring to, about like trying to cover a soccer Saturday, it was like literally my first Saturday on the job since I'd started with the Guardian. And then as I was watching a Bournemouth Liverpool game, and I'm a Bournemouth fan, suddenly breaking news: there's a press conference from the mayor, and I think we all had started to see on social what had happened, and unfortunately, it was the killing of Alex Preddy, the murder of Alex Preddy. Um, but what you've seen since is a little bit of fight back in a different way, where it's like, what do we want this to look like? What core values did we like really think as like quintessentially American, as red, white, and blue, as like screeching eagles and jeeps or whatever? And I think that you saw a really good example of it a week later at the Super Bowl halftime show with Benito, right? And seeing how Bad Bunny was able to approach that with such a that is gonna be studied for years and years and decades. Just like the nuance and the ability to like still make it his show, but make it something that showed joy and unity and these sorts of things. And I think that you look and see for every situation where is it Philadelphia that's kind of gouging on the buses from Lincoln and saying like, tough luck, like you're gonna have to pay 30, 50, whatever dollars to go. You have, an example like Zoran Mamdani looking and saying like, hey, here's a chance where we can actually make this pretty affordable. Kansas City popping up temporary, unfortunately, transit options to get more people moving through the city, to make it more of the city of the future, kind of that it could be. I think that Seattle has always had such a proud track record of being kind of a city of protest and one of collectivism, which is a quality that you certainly saw a lot of in Minnesota, was like kind of collectivist nature as a state and as a people, looking out for each other. And I think it's just like, how do you have more moments like that in this tournament? And I think part of that is, yes, like when is it productive defiant joy and when is it distracted trying to look away from everything joy, because those are two very different things, right? And I think that there's that appetite to sort of find a way to be so intentional with finding joy in all of this sprawl. And I think part of it too will be like, if this tournament will always be unpopular because of its ticket pricing. Let's start there. We're already at a point where World Cup 2026 is going to be, talked about with some disdain because it purely priced out people who had become accustomed to, if not going to World Cups, the idea that the World Cup was something they could afford to go to if they did want to, right? And this was the first time where that was taken away from them. You don't have $20 tickets for host nation like Vladimir Putin did in 2018, because he saw that as politically savvy for him to make it so that his people could go, because that is one of the soft politics. That's classic sports washing, right? Use the sport to make the rest of the medicine go down easier, or the poison or whatever. And I just don't think that has been considered this time in terms of what are the things people care about, what are the things that people don't care about as much. And that's where historically a lot of the exploitation had happened, the stuff that is in front of mind. Well, this has all been in front of mind now. So what is the opportunity then to um for the fans to show that what matters, the fans, the media, we have a role in this too, of course, to show not just what America could be, wants to be, aspires to be, but what World Cups should be. Like, what is the stuff that we kind of look away and say, like, nah, that's just bullshit. Like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And what is stuff that we look at and say, like, yeah, that's important, right? And I think that we're going to do a lot of that identification in real time. We'll know it when we feel it. It's one of those things where it's like, this feels like it's some of the least hype around a World Cup that I can remember. But we have to keep in mind a couple things. One, the last one happened in the middle of the club season, so it was front and center every single week in a very different way, where we weren't talking about title races and relegation battles and DC United versus CF Montreal or whatever. And we were instead just talking about, like, the World Cup's coming. The World Cup's coming, and oh, are they resting this player for the World Cup? What are we going to do with the World Cup? Right? And it's just like you had so much more focus on it, whereas now we're at the business end of a club season again, which we hadn't been since 2018. So it's a very different cadence. The U.S. hadn't been in a summer World Cup on the men's side since 2014. So that's a very different sort of literacy for the sports fandom to recognize when the tournament's coming. I think it's going to be one of those things like the Olympics, where it's suddenly like, now a week or two out, and suddenly everyone's like, okay, who's on the squad, and what is where are the games, when are the games, why can't I afford to go to the games, where are the fan fest, why can't I afford to go to a fan fest? Like, all of these sorts of things will come up then. But I think we're finally getting into the point now where people are really starting to pay attention to it more. And so as a result of that, what do we want people to take away from this tournament? And it's really clear that the operating class of the sport has kind of betrayed its people and doesn't really care at this point about whether or not it's going to go over well with them, how they are running this tournament, how they're pricing this tournament. And so the flip side now is going to be like, how can we make it our own again? And I'm really interested to see what some of those organic efforts are going to be, to try to make this thing closer to what so many of us got hooked on.
Yeah, sport has so often been this kind of agent of change or protest or however you want to kind of define that. And I mean, you mentioned it is so important for us as just American citizens, whether it's in media, whether it's in fans. Like when we talk about kind of for me, what is a successful World Cup? We talked about the results on the field, but the other thing for me that has weighed pretty heavily on me and has been so tough to kind of articulate is just I want us to be able to show, whether it's through the way we cover it, the way we talk about it, or the way even just showing up in games. And you talked about all these cities, and I want when people see this, yes, we could see all the bullshit and all of the terribleness. And there's so much of that that we're also having to deal with and see. But I hope what we can also see both for each other in that encouragement of there is so much good that is here. There is so much that this could be that while this World Cup might not represent what we want it to right now, that it can. And even this country and the way that we do, like it can represent so much more. It can be so much more. It's hard. I'm sure we've all been there at times. It's so demoralizing to see these things. It's so heartbreaking. It's easy to kind of get into that I just want to be distracted and not think about it mode. And I understand that, but I think it is so important for us with this in our own backyard to do the opposite and using this moment to kind of take back what it means to be proud to be American, what it means to cheer for this country and the ideas that we supposedly stand for. And I think it is something that we can hopefully articulate in our roles as media members and also just fans in general. This is one of those things where, man, when you're at a game, if you're a fan and you go to one of these games, that when people are seeing you, that their interactions are, wow, what a great uh, group of people. What a cool thing for this to be. This is what soccer is meant to be. This is the World Cup. This is a global thing. This is meant to be so much more than I think what it's been. Obviously, the last 2 World Cups had their things in that too. It just feels like it's been devolving and devolving, and the sport has become more commercialized, which has obviously had its drawbacks. And then when you combine that with political turmoil and all sorts of things happening, I think it is so incumbent on us as Americans to talk about it. That's why I wanted to make sure we touched on it here because it's so easy to
Absolutely.
just go, we're gonna go kick a ball and we're gonna go have fun. But there's so much more to that. And there are gonna be children that are growing up through this World Cup, like so many kids in the 90s who what they see over the next 8 weeks is going to be their vision of America for a lot of kids, whether it's domestically or internationally. And what
Good
can
point.
we show? And I think that's
Yep.
that's so important.
And
Yeah,
and,
and
and that's something. Go ahead, Brent. Go
no,
ahead.
yeah, I just want to talk like you talk about what young kids and what the '94 games, '94 World Cup did meant to be. I went to the Pontiac Silverdome for the U.S. versus Switzerland and saw different people from different worlds talking and chatting and goofing around with one another, and we were the hosts. And I work in the hospitality business, and I think that what we do as Americans very well is we showcase our culture fantastically, and I think something I'm always positive about an American is that we always take care of people when our backs are on the back, we try to take care of everyone. And we've done it for so many years. Now, obviously in the last few it hasn't been that way, but I think the majority of people want to take care of it. I think you're going to see us be good hosts. I think the majority of the soccer culture in America will be the welcoming culture, and I think that's the positive that of it. I just remember going to the Silverdome and being able to young soccer Brent being like, "Man, this is crazy. There's more people here that at the Pontiac Silver than the Detroit Lions game in the '90s watching Barry Sanders, and I'm watching Eric Wynalda score this amazing goal." It changed my life. Changed my life. I would not be standing in front of you. I would not have played soccer at the Division 1 level, and I would not have been more cultured when it comes to the people who I met when I went to multiple games. Um, and it also set the stage for my younger sister who then got to experience the same thing in '99 when we did the same thing and we became big hosts. So like that is for me, that is a real life story that I hope that we have another generation that has that. All the other crappy things aside that's going on. And it needs to have the attention that it does, but just I'm hoping that there are the next set of children can kind of grow ge- our American culture back to where it was, where we take care of one another and take care of others, the less fortunate. Um, because I just feel like I just believe, and that's maybe it's the American spirit that can happen.
You had, I think, also keep in mind that building off of that, I think that is going to be part of the like potential legacy of this roster. This is the third time we've had a national team go into an international tournament in 2026 since I think the world's view of America really started to warp in reaction to a lot of Trump's international policies in particular, and his treatment of domestic civilians, it should be said, obviously. But I think that when you look at the Olympic men's hockey team, for example, the sort of laughing off of sexism and partying with Cash Patel and that sort of stuff, that sent a message about what it meant to represent the United States in men's hockey, right? Compared to the women's hockey team that did much more of the sort of like what you're talking about, Brent, where it's sort of that inspire the next generation will also hold up the ideals that you believe to be quintessentially American. I think a lot of other Winter Olympians kept that tone, but it was the men's hockey team that I think made the most headlines for it, right? And then you fast forward to the World Baseball Classic, and you have the team talking as if they're foot soldiers and using a lot of that language and saying, "Oh, if I wasn't a star pitcher, dating like the all-time NIL earning athlete, I would be in the military. Believe you me, right?" And it's just like, same, bro, sure, but like at the same point, it's like what does it mean to represent the United States at a tournament? And frankly, what does it mean to be an American man representing the US at a tournament? Because right now, that track record ain't looking good for a lot of team sports. So I think that this is going to be an opportunity for this generation to maybe give their version of what they believe it means to be a US men's national team of any sport. And there is pressure on them, believe you me, because I think that the '94 team ended up becoming such stewards and ambassadors for the sport. Where certainly for the next 20 years, up until broadcast rights really proved that there were going to be interested viewers here. They were doing so much community stuff to keep people interested in it, or going into media, going into coaching, going into speaking tours, whatever the case, but just being so present, um, that I hope that this generation sees an opportunity to do something similar and something positive with the platform that they now have as one of the 26 men on Mauricio Pochettino's squad.
Absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate you coming on and talk to us, obviously, about the soccer stuff, but just kind of the nature of this tournament as well. Folks, if you want to find Jeff's writing and the rest of the coverage from The Guardian, we'll have links in the description. I highly recommend. This is one of my two go-to outlets for soccer news. And as you're hearing, hopefully, through this conversation, it's not just because of the coverage and the reporting, but it's also just the people behind it. I think it's important to support places like that. So, Jeff, thank you so
Thank you.
much for the time. And folks, thanks for listening.